Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first Fall 2021 Virtual Executive Speaker event. My name is Dr. Nicole Coppell, and I'm the MBA Director and a faculty member in the Department of Information Management and Business Analytics. As many of you know, for the past year, we have been offering this virtual Executive Speaker Series, and we have been thrilled by the participation, interest, and easy accessibility of these online events. By offering these events virtually, we've been able to attract interesting, relevant, and timely executive speakers to present to us in this format. And we have been able to include so many members of the Montclair State University community in our audience, including our graduate and undergraduate students, prospective students, alumni, faculty, staff, and multiple members from our school advisory board. The format of this evening session will be a presentation by Catherine Doherty, Senior Vice President and Group Executive for Clinical Franchise Solutions and Marketing at Quest Diagnostics, followed by a fireside chat style interview led by our very own Dr. Kimberly Hollister, Dean of the Feliciano School of Business and second job, Acting Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs. We're very glad that she was able to join us given her busy schedule and multiple jobs. Then following the fireside chat, we will have an opportunity for a Q&A session facilitated by Dr. Petrali Chatterjee, Professor and Chairperson, Department of Marketing. Thank you to everyone who provided questions for Kathy in advance, and we invite you to enter additional questions using the Q&A feature found on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will do our best to have her answer as many of your questions as time permits. At this point, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Betsy Rossini, Associate Dean of the Feliciano School of Business, who will be introducing our featured guest. Betsy.
Thank you, Nicole. We're so happy to be with all of you this evening for our first executive speaker event of the school year, and we're very honored to have Cathy Doherty here to talk about a most timely and important topic: corporate leadership, innovation, and collaboration in the time of a global pandemic. As you're aware, Cathy's impressive title at Quest Diagnostics is Senior Vice President and Group Executive for Clinical Franchise Solutions and Marketing. And in just a moment, Cathy will tell us what that signifies in terms of the scope and substance of her job. But before she begins, I'd like to supply a few facts about Cathy that you may not know. First, Cathy is an MSU and School of Business alumna and a certified public accountant. Before beginning her association with Quest in 1990, she held positions at KPMG and Adidas USA, where she was assistant controller. Cathy joined Quest in its finance division and rose through the ranks in various managerial roles, including investor relations and communications lead, vice president of finance and administration for the hospital business, vice president of hospital services, and senior vice president of physician services. Cathy has also served on numerous Quest Diagnostics joint venture boards, and she is a founding member of an internal networking organization for women in leadership. She currently co-chairs the Quest Inclusion and Diversity Council and is a member of our Feliciano School of Business Advisory Board. So with all of her current activity and immense responsibility, we're doubly grateful for Cathy's willingness to speak with us tonight. And I'm very pleased to now introduce Cathy Doherty.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm really honored to be with all of you today to talk about the COVID-19 health crisis, which I know is on all of our minds, and Quest's response from my perspective as a senior leader at Quest Diagnostics. But before I do that, I'm going to do what Betsy asked me to do, and that is tell you a little bit about what it is I do at Quest Diagnostics. So as Betsy indicated, I'm Senior Vice President and Group Executive for clinical franchise solutions and marketing. And so Quest Diagnostics is the leader in diagnostic information services. And we're organized by what we refer to as clinical franchises, which is organizing our product offering by disease and their health state. And I'm responsible for the general diagnostic franchises, which include infectious disease and immunology, which is where COVID falls, drug monitoring, general health and wellness, and cardiovascular, metabolic, and endocrinology disease. I'm also responsible for marketing on behalf of the enterprise, and I'm also responsible for a few other businesses, our pre-employment drug testing business, our risk assessment business, whereby we do testing on behalf of life insurance companies so that life insurance companies can medically underwrite life insurance policies. And I'm responsible for our direct to consumer business, whereby we go to market as Quest Direct, which is where consumers like you can order tests directly. So super excited to be here to again talk about the COVID-19 health crisis and Quest's response from my perspective. Next slide. So it's hard to believe that it's been 18 months since the start of the COVID-19 health crisis. And as you can imagine, it's really been nonstop collaboration among public health agencies, hospitals, health systems, physicians, and the private sector to really combat this global pandemic. At Quest, we've performed, believe it or not, more than 50 million COVID-19 tests since March of 2020. And our success so far has been made possible through the private and public sector innovation, leadership, and collaboration. It's really taken a village to combat this global pandemic, and I know that it's not over just yet. And innovation has played a huge role here. And, you know, as we've thought about innovation, we've delivered rapidly new assays to help detect the variant. From a leadership perspective, you know, we've played a very big role and we've driven agile operations and really engaged our entire organization's capabilities to solve problems. And we'll talk a little bit about that as the presentation goes on. And then last but certainly not least, we had to collaborate. And it was really important for us to assist in creating programmatic testing so that our communities could have access to testing. Next slide. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had two immediate imperatives. One, of course, was to rapidly mobilize our lab networks to accelerate testing for COVID-19. But at the same time, we needed to make sure our 47,000 employees were safe. We probably all remember where we were in that March 13th to March 16th timeframe, because that's when things really started to kind of come alive. On that Friday, March 13th, our CEO was called to Washington, and the senior management team at Quest had a meeting at our headquarters. And I remember being in the boardroom with my colleagues, and we were talking about, you know, what was going to be our communication to our employees about coming to the office. And over that weekend, one of the early hotspots was Teaneck, New Jersey. Now, maybe some of you live in Teaneck, maybe some of you live nearby, but Teaneck happens to be 10 minutes from our headquarters in Secaucus. And at that time, we realized the gravity of the situation, and we quickly shut down our offices across the nation for our office employees. You know, at the same time, you know, we had to ensure that our labs were up and running safely so that we could be the resource we needed to be during this pandemic. We quickly developed protocols for both our laboratorians, our couriers, our phlebotomists. Our volume early on was growing faster than we could grow our workforce. Volunteers from all walks of our organization were coming in on nights and weekends to help. Our couriers were working tirelessly around the clock to go out and pick up specimens and deliver them back to the labs. You know, quite frankly, at that time, it was these individuals that were our everyday heroes, and you know, something that I'm very proud of. You know, the crisis forced us as an organization to collaborate cross-functionally like never before, and that cross-functional collaboration included, honestly, all functions in the organization, from operations to commercial to legal to marketing to finance to IT, you know, all working to accelerate and expand COVID-19 testing. And, you know, on that March 16th, we launched our first assay. We had the capacity to do 3,000 tests. Today, we have the capacity to do 300,000 tests. You know, it was really important for us to manage our operations in a different way, quite frankly. You know, we had this capacity, right, across this network that was across the United States. However, the specimens weren't necessarily coming from the geographies where our laboratories were. So every morning we needed to come together in order to level load those specimens so that we could maximize the capacity that our lab network brought to the organization. And the other thing that we needed to do was to prioritize healthcare worker specimens. And you know, you might ask, well, why did you have to do that? And quite frankly, at that time, if you recall, healthcare workers were, you know, being exposed, but they were absolutely critical to combating this horrific health crisis. And we needed to make sure that we were turning around that test result really quickly so that, one, if the individual was infected, we could remove them from the workforce. But two, if that individual wasn't affected, we could keep them in the workforce to do what they were doing to help combat the pandemic. You know, we experienced significant global supply chain challenges, and we really needed to remain agile. You know, when I talked about collaborating earlier, I think I failed to identify that procurement was a critical part of that collaboration. And oftentimes procurement is kind of, you know, let's say in the back of the room. Well, I can tell you during this effort, they've been front and center. You know, early on, you know, almost out of the gate, we didn't have enough swabs for us to collect the specimens. And so our procurement team worked tirelessly to find alternative suppliers. And then lastly, we also had to help protect our patients at our patient service centers with enhanced safety protocols and services. So, you know, as you can imagine, we implemented social distancing, we implemented mask wearing, and we also implemented the ability to text with our patients so that we could tell them to wait in their car until such time our phlebotomist was available to serve them. So lots of things had to happen at the very beginning of this process. Next slide. You know, we developed and delivered advanced solutions at a rapid pace. And we did that by working in collaboration with the FDA, the CDC, HHS, and other state and federal public health agencies, again, to help manage and track the virus through COVID-19 testing. Now, we don't often think about this, but part of a public health crisis requires reporting to public health. And we were instrumental in enabling that. And quite frankly, you know, it's an infrastructure that already exists that we were able to leverage. So what did that, you know, development and rapid pace look like? Well, what I can tell you is that in record time, meaning, it was 7 days to launch. It was 7 days for us to launch a COVID-19 molecular laboratory developed test following commercial lab testing authorization to participate by the CDC. So fastest that we've ever done it. You know, we continue to innovate in our labs to support testing needs at every stage. You know, earlier I talked a little bit about moving from 3,000 tests a day from a capacity perspective to 300,000. Well, in order for us to do that, aside from getting, accessing more equipment, we leveraged innovation and we incorporated this notion of pooling specimens to increase our capacity. This is where you can put a number of specimens into one tube to be tested. And this is a mechanism that's used in geographies where the positivity rate is low. That significantly expanded our capacity, which was really important. We worked on automating RNA extraction, and the whole, this was a part of the process that took a long time, and we were trying to improve our cycle time. Turning around our test in 24 hours was really important to solve this public health crisis. And then lastly, we were able to develop a self-collection kit. So an observed self-collection kit. So, as we think about the collaboration that we did and the fact that this virus was so contagious, it was really important for a patient to be able to collect their own specimen to help prevent the spread of disease. We deployed an antibody serology test in April. That was when we understood that people could have caught the virus and not experience symptoms. And we knew that serology testing was our key to know who might have been previously infected. And at the same time, we began to evaluate rapid antigen offerings as a method for immediate on-site testing. And, again, turnaround time was critical, and we looked at the entire landscape to be able to serve and combat this global pandemic. Next slide. I think if we think about the time in 2020, I think we'd all agree that the heat of the battle was probably in that March, April, May timeframe, right? I think we all recall very early on kind of almost never leaving our homes. But as that period passed and as states started preparing to reopen, we knew that we had a part to play in helping our nation return to life after lockdown. So our top priority became helping to ensure a safe return to care for physicians, a return to work for employees, and a return to school for students like you. We recognized a strong market demand for programmatic testing using PCR and rapid antigen. And, this wasn't something that Quest had done before on a larger scale. Look, we were in the business of serving physicians and hospitals, but we knew that there was a need, and we knew that it was important to opening up our nation again. And so we developed a business model. We actually redeployed all kinds of resources. We developed internal capabilities and a go-to-market strategy to create various on-site testing programs for COVID-19. We also partnered with retailers like CVS and Walmart for drive-through consumer-initiated testing to, again, expand access to the general public. If we think back, folks really didn't know where to go to get testing, and we were part of trying to solve for that. We partnered with HHS for pop-up testing solutions because we knew that physician offices weren't open, and if they were, they really didn't want symptomatic patients traipsing through their waiting room. We have since deployed programs across the country with hundreds of private employers, universities, K-12 schools, and others to routinely test for COVID-19 and safeguard the population from this deadly virus. Next slide. Now, at the same time, we also began looking for solutions to a much larger problem that was highlighted during the pandemic. And this was the problem the problem here was the access to testing and healthcare in general for underserved populations that were disproportionately affected by this crisis. So we launched a $500 million initiative called Quest for Health Equity. And we did that back in September of 2020. So, just about a year ago. And that initiative now works with local and national organizations to support access to testing, but with a larger goal of closing the healthcare gap for local communities in need. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty proud of working for Quest Diagnostics. I spent a lot of time here, and one of our 3 key goals, big goals at Quest Diagnostics is to promote a healthier world. And so, I've always felt great about, coming to work every day. I felt like I really had a purpose, but I think this initiative has taken it to a whole new level. We're working towards inclusive and equitable healthcare. We're providing COVID-19 testing for groups in need and those who serve them. We're funding programs that address the root causes of health inequities. And, we're giving back to the community. And again, I can't tell you how proud I am of the initiative that we've undertaken to enable this. I think it's super important, and very excited about, what it's going to be able to accomplish. Next slide. Now, of course, a year later, we're in an interesting phase of the pandemic. In our world, we call it the 4th surge, as a result of the more recent Delta variant that is continuing to surge. And actually this morning, I think we probably all hear from Dr. Scott Gottlieb a whole lot more than we ever did before. In fact, I think he's become a household name. He said that, the Northeast, still up for grabs relative to the Delta variant. Hopefully it's not going to surge to the same extent it did in other parts of the country. But, obviously the country is experiencing this as federal and state agencies are working diligently to increase our vaccination rate. What Quest is doing is we're expanding access to zero out-of-pocket COVID-19 testing for the general public, which is absolutely critical. We are performing genetic sequencing in collaboration with the CDC to detect and track new variants, which we know is absolutely critical to understanding this virus. We're participating in a SARS-CoV-2 zero prevalence antibody testing study with the CDC, and that's to really understand, kind of the status of immunity, whether that's a function of having received the vaccine or having been previously affected. Now, I know that I mentioned that we're doing genetic sequencing to detect and track new variants. Know that our COVID-19 molecular tests are highly specific and sensitive and are detecting all variants, new and old. So really important, so that I'm not creating fear in what doesn't exist. If we go to the next slide, we all have come a long way since the beginning of this pandemic. And I think we probably would all describe the environment as being partially back to life, with schools, restaurants, entertainment venues, and even sports stadiums are now open. We're actively working with the CDC and others to continue providing innovative solutions through public and private collaborations. And if you think about the recent Biden announcement, testing needs to be part of the solution. But what I would tell you is there is no silver bullet to solving the pandemic. It's about vaccination. It's about behaviors. It's about testing. It's about clinical therapies. That's what's going to enable us to learn how to live with the virus, which is what I think is going to be required. The response of Quest Diagnostics and many other private companies to the pandemic is a real business case study for how private and public collaboration can accelerate innovation and mobilize broad-scale operations to serve the public good. We at Quest Diagnostics believe that healthcare is a team sport. We also believe that if you do good, you'll do well. What I would say is that you need to figure out how to do both of those things. Generate profit while making a positive impact as you enter the workforce. You know, business certainly has an important role to play in driving innovation and leading the way to solve problems. To solve the challenges of the pandemic and beyond, we as industry leaders need to stay agile and drive innovation through collaboration so that we can save lives and really learn how to live with the virus. You know, I know that the pandemic isn't over, but I know that we're on the way to it being over. Again, there's no silver bullet, but I'm awfully proud of the role that Quest Diagnostics has played and is playing in combating this deadly virus. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who I think is going to get us started on the next aspect of this dialogue.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was really a wonderful overview of Quest's incredible response to pandemic's enormous challenges. At this point, we would like to have Dean and Acting Provost Kimberly Hollister facilitate the fireside chat interview questions so we could learn a little bit more about Kathy's leadership style and her experience. Dr. Hollister?
Thanks, Nicole. Kathy, thank you so much for that discussion. And before I jump into some of the questions about your journey, a couple of the things that struck me were, I was just trying to go back and picture, beginning of March when you're facing all of these challenges, and that then you spoke of the agility of your organization and collaboration and innovation and how much you accomplished. But then you came back later and we're talking about your mission and about that shared mission about the organization. And I was wondering if you could speak to how did those things work together to help get Quest to the point that you were and to be able to accomplish so much in such a short period of time.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, Kimberly. And look, I think, in healthcare, all organizations are looking for purpose, right? I think, maybe that's the big buzzword, but in healthcare, there's a natural purpose. And so when we think about the individuals that are attracted to our organization, what we find is that those are individuals that really want to do good. And so I think that we're, honestly blessed with a population that's just inclined to help. And yes, we're a publicly traded company, and we have objectives to deliver top and bottom line growth. But at the end of the day, our North Star is promoting a healthier world. And again, we think if we live by that North Star, the rest is going to take care of itself. And again, I think that as a result of that North Star, we attract a whole different kind of individual. And again, those are our heroes. And, I think they've done really amazing work.
Thank you. And the other part is really, Quest as well as other organizations who are on a similar mission. We're just so thankful. We were talking about it before we started tonight, that it's so amazing to see this campus back at life, right? And the students enjoying themselves. And some people saying we have more activity now than we did before, and only because of all of the amazing work that you did and the team did where you were. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so it's interesting you should say that, because as you can imagine, we partnered and collaborated with the vaccine manufacturers, right? And every time that we got on a call with our vaccine, whether that be Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca, the first thing that we started with was thank you, right? We were so grateful because, again, I don't think there's a silver bullet, and all these pieces play an integral role. And I just think, it's really been amazing to see, again, that public-private collaboration. And I think we all, I think if you were to ask somebody prior to this happening, whether or not we'd be able to respond this way, I think we probably would have hesitated and not have been confident. But, sometimes, necessity, just gives you that adrenaline and drive to, make things happen.
It's an amazing story. And I think you also watch different communities come together. I mean, we've been so pleased with the way this campus community has come together to create a safe environment by, having such a high vaccination rate and, masking and all of those things that we, that we're doing and all the people on the call are doing is, it's helping. And so hopefully, in a world that sometimes doesn't seem like we all agree, it's great to see that on campus and to also hear the story of how much collaboration, you did with other folks in your industry.
Yeah.
So back to what we were supposed to be talking about afterwards. Can you talk a little bit about how you went from your original background in accounting to your journey with Quest? How did you find that trajectory?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I graduated from Montclair in 1984, which I know is eons ago, maybe folks on this call maybe weren't even born, which is kind of funny. I went to work for KPMG. I was an accounting major and thought public accounting was kind of the right road to take kind of out of the gate. But I knew that I was not going to stay in public accounting. I got my CPA and thought I would move into industry. And lo and behold, after about 5 years there, I spent a lot of time at one of my major clients, which was Adidas USA, and I got a job offer. And, that's typically how the trajectory went. I stayed at Adidas for about 18 months and then wound up joining a predecessor to Quest Diagnostics by the name of MedPath. They were a wholly owned subsidiary of Corning, and it seemed like a great place to work. Right now, we were about a $750 million business. Last year we generated almost $10 billion in revenue. Now, COVID, helped that year, but again, we've grown so much. As I think about my career, one of the things that I've always worked on was trying to learn as fast as I could, Kimberly, no matter where I was, because I thought the faster I learned, the faster I could progress. And quite frankly, it was never my plan to stay at any company, never mind Quest Diagnostics for, the 31 years I've been here. I thought I would need to move in order to advance my career. But I've been, really fortunate to be able to grow as the organization grew. And, I spent about 10 years of that time at Quest in that finance function. But I always had this pull from a very early age to want to run a business, right? And so, even when I started at Quest Diagnostics, this industry is super fragmented, right? I wouldn't describe it as a cottage industry at this point, but when I joined, it was a cottage industry. And I thought to myself, wow, if I could get somebody, like a friend that was like a scientist, a laboratorian, and I could get a friend that was a billing person, I think I could start a lab. And, then maybe I could sell it back to MedPath because, we were kind of on an acquisition tour of duty, so to speak. But, really, I was looking to learn. And interestingly enough, I spent 10 years in the finance function working for the CFO. And, I woke up one day and realized that I was respected, but I wasn't certain if I was respected for me or that I was respected working under the CFO. Like, was it really the CFO providing direction that made me successful, or was I successful to some degree on my own? And so I went to him and I said, look, I love working for you. I've learned so much, but I think I need to separate from you so that I can demonstrate to the organization that, kind of on my own 2 feet, I'm really good. And so, that was hard to do, but I, took the plunge and lo and behold, believe it or not, we were probably at that time, we had went public as Quest Diagnostics as an independent company about 2 years prior to that. And, and although we were working with Wall Street, we didn't have a dedicated investor relations function. And so the CFO came back to me pretty quickly and said, hey, Kathy, what about leading investor relations? Would that be of interest to you? And, and I had been doing some work in the function, kind of working with the analyst and guiding them on their models. And I said, well, yeah, I think that would be great. But, if it reports to you, I don't think I can do it, right? Because I'm back in the same boat. And so, went away, came back shortly thereafter, and lo and behold, he said, hey, what if it reports into the CEO? Now that, be careful what you wish for. That wasn't necessarily my objective, but, it wound up being an awesome opportunity. And, what that did was it gave me more access to the organization. It gave me access to the strategy. It also enabled me to develop my selling skills, right? That, investor relations isn't about providing information. It's about getting folks to want to invest in your company versus somebody else's. And so that was just a fantastic opportunity. I did that role for a relatively short period of time, and lo and behold, our communications and government affairs leader decided to leave the organization. Now, one of the things that I tell folks is, I feel like one of the ways that I've been able to advance my career is once I master what it is I'm primarily responsible for, I go to whomever it is I'm working for and say, I got capacity, I can do more. So if you need something else done, I'm the person for you. Well, I had done that, after, probably 6 months leading investor relations. And when that person decided to leave, the CEO came to me and he said, hey, I think we need to put communication, investor relations, and government affairs together. Do you want to lead it? Well, I mean, honestly, I was a little taken aback because, folks that have subject matter expertise in finance oftentimes are not necessarily considered the greatest communicators. So, but look, I thought I could do it. And, what I would say is, I've taken risk along the way, calculated risk. I would also say I worked hard, but that was my mechanism to, continue to take on new challenges. And so really, every 2 to 3 years, I changed roles in this path to get to leading a business. That was kind of my, end goal. And I've got there, and, it's amazing is kind of how I would describe it. And, but again, I think I've been really fortunate to have been able to grow with the organization.
That's phenomenal to hear the story. And as you went along, how did mentors, or how did you as a mentor or other people who were mentors to you, how did that play into your path as you move forward?
Yeah, so I know that we talk a lot about mentorship, but the other word that often gets bounced around is sponsorship. And I would say if you have the opportunity to be sponsored, mentorship, you kind of agree that you're going to have this relationship. Sponsorship kind of happens to you. Somehow somebody sees something in you, and they, take you under their wings, so to speak, and challenge and help you advance, right? And I had the luxury of, a fair amount of sponsors. The CFO at Quest Diagnostics, the COO at Quest Diagnostics that eventually became the CEO, and then the CEO, which was the gentleman I reported to when I led investor relations. And, I think, honestly, somehow they see something in you that maybe you don't see, and you have to embrace it. And now you can't let them down, don't get me wrong, right? You need to do your thing, and you need to work hard, and you need to constantly be asking for feedback. But that has been, invaluable for me in my advancement.
Interesting. So obviously, as you've gone through the organization, and I'm sure your leadership style has changed. And so I'm curious, so how did that did you have to shift anything? Did you have to learn something about how to lead when we were going through this pandemic?
So yeah, no. So when I think about the first time I got, let's say a general manager role, which was kind of the prize that I was going after initially, I was so focused, Kimberly, on driving results. Because I thought I needed to demonstrate to the organization that I could do this job, right? And in that time frame, I had the opportunity to go to an executive education class that afforded me the opportunity to, learn more and refine myself as a leader. And part of that process included a 360. And it was one of the first ones that I did. And when I got the results back, I needed to share them with my boss along with my team. And I was surprised and not so happy. And what I found was that folks noticed that all I cared about was driving the results, right? And they didn't feel that I cared about the team as individuals or collectively as a team. And I don't think I realized that that was happening. And I was so focused on, letting folks know I can do this job that I kind of lost sight of that. And I think it was a big eye opener for me. And quite frankly, the higher you go up in the organization, and I'm sure you certainly know this, the more that you can't get done by yourself, right? You need that team to enable success, right? And I did know that, but again, I kind of maybe lost sight of that. And since that time, I've been very devoted to my teams, right? Both in understanding what motivates them, understanding, what it is that they want, and understanding and getting them to understand collectively that this is our goal and how are we going to do it and how important they are to that, and how important it is to have an amazing team that's a whole lot smarter than you. And so I think that was a big eye opener for me in terms of how I changed my leadership style. And when I think about COVID, look, I think in this particular situation, we needed to share kind of responsibility, right? There wasn't one person or one function that was going to be able to get this done. It was really working together in tangent that we were going to be able to create success. And you had to trust people, you had to empower them, right? And you had to allow them to make decisions because, there was no time, right? And sometimes, an imperfect decision is better than no decision, right? And so, it really just being agile was, I think, really important. And then, giving yourself time to think about, how to further capitalize on the opportunity.
That's fantastic. Really, it's just interesting to think about how, your progression, not only your progression, but just the progression of the organization. And you mentioned earlier about constantly seeking feedback. And, I think it's, as you think about the audience that we have, students that are going out in the workforce, and I'm just wondering, in terms of advice for them and how to both accept and receive feedback is, because it's not always easy. Easy when people love what you're doing, not always when it's the other way, but can you speak a little bit about that and any other type of advice that you would have for our students?
Sure. So I think, so I mentioned that I went to this executive education program and it was multifaceted, right? And, one of the takeaways, and there were many and it was like a 30-day intensive, no break program that was away. One of the takeaways that I took from that was this notion of feedback. And and making sure that when you provide feedback, that the person walks away feeling taller than they did when they arrived, right? Feedback is all in the delivery, right? And you can be clear and constructive and still positive. And so I'm not going to tell you that I always do that. I mean, it's a really tall order, but I think about that often. And what I would also say from myself personally, when in fact you get, look, we all go through, annual performance reviews. And the other thing I would say is, look, I think from my team perspective, I try and give real-time feedback. I think it's just so important. Waiting till the end of the year doesn't make sense at all. You have to dig really deep into your memory to kind of, recall things. So, real-time feedback is absolutely important. But I also think that when I get feedback, I really work hard to, use an opportunity where maybe I can demonstrate that I improved, or at least I'm trying to improve, and then circle back with that individual and ask if I did. Or, what I would say is, even if it's not that individual that gave me the feedback, I might ask somebody else that I trust to say, hey, pay attention to me in this environment, and I'm going to ask you a few questions, when this is over, so that I can get an objective view of, whatever it is I'm trying to evaluate. So, I think having the courage to do that is really important, and people really like it. It's interesting. I know this is crazy and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but my niece graduated from Michigan State in May, and she started a new job in California. And she's a finance major, and she started a bank last week. And she's in this development program around credit analyst. And somebody from, I guess higher up in the organization sent an email out to these like 50 or 60 young kids, I'm going to say from my perspective, letting them know that there was a problem with the work that they were doing, and that because they must do a set of work and then provide it to the next folks so that they can do their job, and it wasn't being done properly. Well, my niece, and it went to lots of people. My niece took that, as, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong? She immediately went to her supervisor with the email and said, am I doing, how can I do better? What can I do wrong? That email went to about 50 people. Only 2 people in the group went and asked that question. And so, feedback is a gift. But and again, it's all in the delivery, but, most people kind of understand that, and no one's looking. People have all the right intentions to help you get better, and that's how you have to think about it.
Great advice, and good to see that apples don't fall that far from trees. So she was not surprising that she was one of those 2 people who went to get help. Yeah. I found the same thing when you're in the situations that it's a new situation, and sometimes you think you should know everything and you can't. And how do you acquire that knowledge? How do you learn in that environment? Mm-hmm. So I think that there are some questions from the audience.
Yes, Nicole? There are questions.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you,
sure.
Kimberly. Kathy, our students have many questions. I'm going to pick up the one that matches or has some relationship to the last question you answered. So the question that one of our students asked is, as a leader, what was the most important thing that you communicated with your team or teams once the pandemic hit? Was this taken well by every individual? If not, what was the next step for you to ensure everybody was on the same page?
So look, when the pandemic hit, and we were all working remotely, and quite frankly, it was a scary time, right? I don't know that I was focused on feedback relative to the job at hand as much as I was focused on making sure my employees were okay. And so, you know, and look, I think when we think about the beginning of the pandemic, we thought we were going to be all back at work in 2 weeks, right? And then,
Yeah.
2 weeks passed and 6 weeks passed, and we thought, oh, well, we're going to be back July 4th. Like, it keeps rolling out. But in the very beginning, I wanted to make sure that my team felt connected, right? So I was having, like, every other day, daily Zoom meetings, not for any reason other than to be connected and to share, what it was we knew about the virus, and give folks an opportunity to just talk amongst one another. In fact, I also realized that folks were going to be, at one point I realized that folks were going to be working home for a long time, and I wound up sending out, actually you can't see this, but it's like a little holder of either a phone or an iPod, and it was more to try and make their work area a little bit more comfortable. So those are the kinds of things that I did at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I think it was less about feedback because, look, I'll tell you that I believe that my team did an amazing job of rising to the occasion and really figuring this all out. Now, and a lot of resources were redeployed against COVID, right? But I mentioned that I had a pre-employment drug testing business. And look, no one was getting hired, and that's when pre-employment drug testing happens, and the volume was plummeting. And, we had a cost structure at a different level than, what we could support. And, look, my teams went to work in trying to, right size that cost structure, but in a way that had the employee in mind, meaning, at that time, when the government was implementing the federal supplement, we were able to keep our employees whole and actually have them not come to work. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but I think our employees really appreciated that. Many of our employees are parents that had young children that weren't going to school, and it was really difficult to balance work and life. And so, honestly, I just feel like I just had an amazing team.
Thank you. Thank you. That helps. And the little actions that reaching out to employees with, I'm sorry, there's some noise here. Reaching out to employees with the little holder for their phone or iPad goes a long way to show that you care, you on behalf of Quest care about the employees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question is somewhat important, but also has many different aspects to it. So what position has Quest taken as an organization with respect to persuading reluctant individuals to get vaccinated, especially as well as debunking disinformation about safety and vaccines?
So that's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
So, we have, as an organization, at this time, we have not mandated vaccines, but we've encouraged them, and we've developed an opportunity for employees to be able to upload their vaccine results. Prior to the Delta variant surge, we had thought we were going to begin to voluntarily come back to the office in the summertime, right? Starting in June, July, and August, and then in September to come back more frequently. And one of the things that we did at that time to encourage vaccination was setting up a protocol that allowed vaccinated employees not to have to wear masks while at the office. And we thought that that was going to have an impact. Now, lo and behold, the Delta variant crept up on us and we had to reverse that. It's interesting that you should say that, because now I just before I got on this call, I received a PowerPoint deck that is grounded in scientific evidence around the vaccine to share with our employees. And so, we're doing that through our medical community, but we're working really hard to make sure that it's grounded in scientific evidence and that it's understandable. The other thing that I would say is, earlier Nicole mentioned that I was a founder of one of our employee business networks, Women in Leadership. Well, we have all kinds of employee business networks throughout our company, for caregivers, for the African American population, for the Latino population, for the Pan Asian. And we're trying to use the leaders of those groups to share this scientific evidence about vaccine to influence their community. So we're taking a couple of different approaches to enable that.
Thank you. Thank you. And what I believe will be the
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, for what I believe will be the last question, I'm going to do a throwback to your times as an MSU grad. As an alumna of Montclair State School of Business, class of 1984, can you take us back to what the world of work looked like as you graduated?
Yeah, so, so again, it's a pretty long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And I think the world was really, really different. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have email. There were no, everything was done face to face. Research was done in libraries. Business was different. At the time, one of the things that I talk about with women of my age, and, kind of graduating at that time and going to work for an accounting firm, which, at that time was a very conservative environment to work in. Oftentimes, women attempted to, wear clothes that were like men's, meaning, you wore suits with those little scarf ties. Now, I am going to tell you that I never did that, right? I like to think of myself as pretty fashionable, and I wanted to show up fashionable at work, and I thought, that, maybe I would get more notice, but, it just was a whole really different time. And I would say that, leadership very rarely included women, very, very rarely. And oftentimes I found myself, at a client, when you work for an accounting firm like that, you typically have your client and you sit in a conference room all together. Well, oftentimes, I was in a client conference room with all males. And so, I would say that was really different than, what I see today and, and what I experience.
Thank you.
Helps.
Thank
there
you.
was no LinkedIn. There was no instant news. There was just so many things that were different.
You had to use a phone call. You had to use one of those rotary dial phones. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think. Yeah, exactly.
This was inspiring, and this is great news for all of our students, especially our female students who get to see, where you've come from and where you are, and look around this room and, women leaders all over the place, so absolutely inspiring. Thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you. And just so that you know, I happen to be first generation college graduate from my family. So, you know, I know that's many of the stories associated with the students today, and I can
Yes.
absolutely relate to that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Wow. This really was an amazing hour.
Sure.
We learned so much from you, Kathy. I mean, that was quite an impressive presentation. And thank you also to Kimberly and Petrali for assisting with facilitating this session. We are thrilled. We had over 200 people join us this evening on this virtual webinar. And for you in the audience, we want to thank you for your participation in submitting your questions and helping us be able to continue this dialogue. So at this moment, I'd like to actually give a small little commercial to invite you to the next upcoming executive speaker events. Besides having our executive speaker, what I'm really excited about is to let you know that our plan right now is for our next 2 speaker events to be in person. So we really do hope you'll be able to join us, but space may be limited. So it's really important that you respond and let us know that you'll be able to attend. So again, please join us on October 19th for Irv Dennis, from retired Ernst & Young partner and former CFO of the U.S. Department of HUD. And also on Monday, November 15th, Gregory Collins, owner of G. Collins and Company. So those will be our next 2 speakers. So we look forward to seeing you again there. And again, conditions permitting, we intend for that to be in person. So thanks again. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know some of you have class to move on to this evening, so enjoy your class. Best of luck, and stay safe, stay healthy, and good luck with everything you're doing. Have a great night.